Sitting in my seat a while ago, praying that God would guide and direct me uh, as far as the thoughts, what to say this morning. And there was something that came to mind in my Bible. Some preachers, they got all kinds of Bibles laying in every room. I'm not that way. I've got one Bible, and you're looking at it right here. This is the one that I like to study out of. I've had it a long time. But in the back, whenever that particular people have been saved or baptized, or a particular thought comes across, I'll write that down if I feel it's worthy to be put in the back of my Bible. I've almost got a book in the back of my Bible on these pages. I want to read you something that came to mind as I was sitting there this morning. And I want you to think about it, especially as a mother. Here's the thought. Plant shade trees that you may never get to sit under. Why? Because someone else may need them. Did you ever think about that? You can be 80 years old. Or you can be 73. That's right. I think it's not too late to plant shade trees. I'm not talking about literal shade trees, but I'm talking about planting things in people's mind that they may need the shade of in the stress of life that they're going through. That's what this thought is talking about. We need to continue to keep planting thoughts within our children. Your children may be grown, but I'll guarantee you, chances are they're probably listening better now than they were when they were teenagers. But the thing about it is, there's always something that mothers in particular can and always do plant within their children's lives. I want to go back this morning into the book of Proverbs. And in the book of Proverbs, what they were looking at here, let me find it myself. Larry Mitchell had pastored here for what, almost around 30 years? Did you know when Mother's Day came up, I can almost tell you exactly what book he was going to and what chapter. He always went to the book of Proverbs where he talked about the virtuous woman in chapter 31. You could almost bet probably 9 times out of 10 he would preach out of Proverbs 31 because of the virtuous woman. Now, when we're looking at that, I want you to realize this morning, you as a mother, the power that you've either had, whether your children are probably still do with your children growing up, or if you've got little ones. There is a lot of power that a mother has in her in raising children in their formative years. There was a not a gospel singer, a country singer years ago by the name of Glenn Campbell. I remember one of the songs that he put out when he says, "She who rocks the cradle rules the world." The influence she has upon her children. I think of that. A mother may look very insignificant, just rocking and taking care of her children, changing diapers, getting up in the middle of the night and going in there to take care of them, or maybe to take them a bottle. You have no idea the amount of influence during those times that you have upon your child. The power a mother has in a child's formative years is beyond what you can put on a scale. Now, in looking in the Proverbs 31, that's where we're going to go to this morning as a starting place. I looked at the Proverbs 31, and it gives these qualifications or these characteristics that a virtuous mother has. And some of those, mamas, may be hard to match up to. Let's look at a few of them, okay? Book of Proverbs, chapter 31, says this in verse 10. Who can find a virtuous woman? Question mark. And it's saying, if you can, her price is far above rubies. She's worth a great deal more than any stone, ladies, that you can wear on your finger. You know, we evaluate how important things are. A lot of times physical things by how much you pay for them. But you know what? A mother, according to this verse, he says, who can find one? In other words, that means it may be that they're rare. But if you can find a virtuous woman, she is worth a great deal more than any stone or precious ruby that can be put on the finger. Now, here's the point, though. In looking at this, and I know how Satan works upon us in particular, it asks the question in verse 10, well, who can find one? But going on over in there, look at verses 16 and 17, where it talks about some of her characteristics. She considereth the field, and she inspects it, and buys it with the fruit of her hands, and she planteth a vineyard. In other words, improves upon that. She girdeth her loins with strength, and she strengthened her arms. In other words, a true virtuous woman is one that's not idle, but she's doing things that improves upon the lifestyle, not only of her, but her family. There's a characteristic. You look at that and say, well, I'm not sure how well that I do at that. Let's look at another one here in Proverbs 31, verses 25 through 30. Let's see what it says here. It says, strength and honor are her strength, or her clothing, and she shall rejoice in time to come because of that. But then it says, as she opens her mouth with wisdom, and in her tongue is the law of kindness. She looketh well to the ways of her household. She carefully looks at her household. And she eateth not the bread of idleness. In other words, she's watching over her household, but she's trying to take care of the needs of her family. I've got a wife I've been married to for 54 years. The times that she's took care of me, I can't number. The times she's took care of my children is without number. As some of you mamas are here this morning, nobody keeps a written record of how many times you may get up in any one night or any one week to go in and check on your baby or take care of them, or to change their diapers, or to sit there and try to feed them. You ever notice the little guys? I've got a little great-grandson. I've got a picture of him eating his birthday cake. I think it was his first birthday. Did you know they was trying to feed him cake? He was spitting it everywhere he could. Just showering people with birthday cake. Mama's patient. She just keeps it feeding. You cannot put a price upon a mama that is taking care of her family. That makes her a virtuous woman. It goes on down to say this. Verse 28. Her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praises her. Many daughters have done virtuously, but none excelleth them all, surpasses. Favor is deceitful, and beauty is vain, but a woman that feareth the Lord, she shall be praised. Give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her own works praise her in the gates. Let her own works praise what that she's doing. Now, when we look at this, the power of a mother, you can begin to see things right here in Proverbs 31 of where a mother demonstrates the things that makes power within her life, the things that etch into the minds and the being of a person that makes them who they are. What if I made this statement to you? Mothers and all that they do and all that they have to do they're still imperfect people. They are. Did you know Satan is so good at taking us on our weak points and just keep pounding and pounding and pounding away in our lives said, you're imperfect, you could never be a good mother. That's a lie within itself right there. Did you know that God uses imperfect people to do His great work? Have you ever thought about that? Let me give you a for instance here out of the book of Exodus, chapter 3. I feel if we could bring that up here for people to look at. It was time, and God was ready for His children to be led out of Egypt. And He goes to a man by the name of Moses. Moses didn't want this job, but God wanted him to do it. And notice what that Moses says here when the Lord begins to talk to him about, this is what I want you to do, Moses. This was no small task. Chapter 3 of Exodus, verses 8 through 18 says this. It gives us a dialogue of what went on between God and Moses when God was saying, Moses, you're the man. Here's what He says. And I am come down to deliver them. He's talking about the children of Israel out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land into a good land, and a large, into a land flowing with milk and honey, unto a place of the Canaanites, and the Hittites, the Amorites, and the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Now, therefore, He's told Moses this, and He says, therefore, behold, the cry of the children of Israel is coming to me. They were in slavery. That's why they're crying out. And I have also seen the oppression wherewith the Egyptians oppress them. Come now, therefore, Moses, and I will send thee to Pharaoh, that thou mayest bring forth my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. And Moses said unto God, now notice what he does. Why would he do this? An honor to be considered of God to do this? That's not the way Moses is looking at it. He says, Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and that I should bring forth the children of Israel out of Egypt? And He said, certainly I will be with thee. That He here is God. Here's the point. God is wanting Moses to lead the children of Israel out of bondage to their promised land. Moses knows himself, and he knows, I am not a perfect being. I'm not perfect, and Lord, you want me to lead your people to the promised land? And boy, listen, he begins to give all kinds of excuses. But the bottom line is this. God uses imperfect people to do His work. You here this morning, you may think, God could never use me for anything. Well, if He should tap you on the shoulder and says, hey, I got something I want you to do, you can rest with assurance that if God is directing in it, that you can do the work of God. You see what I'm saying? This especially goes for mamas. Mamas in particular. You may look at Proverbs 31 here and says, well, that doesn't sound like me at all, what that he's talking about a virtuous woman is. You're looking at your imperfections, but God says, I can use you even if you are an imperfect person. By the way, I might say that's not just mamas. That's anybody that by faith will follow the things of God. What brings this up and causes me to say this? Years ago, Carl and I was working at a factory up in Springdale. This would have been back in the early 70s. And we had a boss that his wife had a baby about the same time that Carolyn did. And the funny thing about it was they both named them Stephanie. And he was telling me one day that after his wife had carried this baby for 9 months, and after the baby was born, she broke down after they got home and said, I don't know how to take care of this baby. I don't know, ladies, because I'm not a woman. I'm not a mama. Is it possible that's a common deal, that mamas think that they can't take care of their babies? Give God credit when You allow Him to lead. This mama looked the situation over and she said, this baby's going to die if somebody don't take care of it. She carried it for 9 months. And now then, she didn't know how to take care of it. I wonder if that was changing diapers or what. I can tell you from the truth, as a daddy, when diapers were changed at our house when ours were little, I wasn't a very good daddy. When it come time to change diapers, not me. Lord, I can't do that. And especially them dirty diapers. I could not say. Did you know what? It gives me the dry heaves when I see dirty diapers. I'm not kidding on that. So the point of it is, I didn't make a very good daddy, I suppose, to children in that way. I hope I haven't some others. But you see, God does use imperfect people to carry on His work. There is nobody, of all of you sitting here this morning, there's not one person here that is perfect 100%. The only one that's ever been perfect, that's walked the face of this earth, was Jesus Christ. He's the one that died for our sins. So you see, He's the only one perfect, but and it's God's plan, it's not ours, that the work of God is done by imperfect people. Isn't that strange? Now, you know, we could look on into this. Why would God use imperfect people? All right. Phil, if you would, pull up 2 Corinthians chapter 4. I want to read something here. I found this. I think it makes a lot of difference. In 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 5 through 7 says this. Paul was talking about himself. And in verse 5 of 2 Corinthians 4, he says this. For we preach not ourselves, but Christ Jesus the Lord. He said, you know what he's saying by that? He said, the focus is not on me. It's on Jesus Christ. He's the one that can do that for you. We don't preach ourselves, but we preach Jesus Christ the Lord, and ourselves your servants for Jesus' sake, for the cause of Christ. And then he says this, for God who commanded the light to shine out of darkness has shined in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. Now look at verse 7. Here is why that God can still use imperfect people. But we have this treasure, this message of Jesus Christ, Paul is saying. That's the treasure. For we have this treasure in earthen vessels, not something that's made of gold or silver, but in an old earthen vessel. And he tells us the reason why. That the excellency of the power may be of God and not us. God uses imperfect people, the earthly vessels, let's call it, for that the power and the honor and the glory belongs to God. Does that make sense to you? I hope so. But when we're talking about mothers this morning, you have no idea. Well, maybe you do. Maybe I'm the one that's ranting and raving for nothing. But sometimes we allow Satan to begin to try to convince us that you're not a very good mama. If you're giving your best, you're a very good mama, in my sense. Moses' mama. You know, Moses was born in a time when they were killing the Israelite babies just right and left. This would be what we would call population control. Moses, when he was born, his mama saw him and knew that he was a special baby. I think that's the way I see this. And she hid that baby until it got to the point where I don't think they could keep him quiet anymore. They couldn't keep him hid because every time one would be found, they'd kill that baby. And she thought that Moses was a special child, and he was. But being a typical mama, you know what happened? By faith, Mama, there's a place for faith in your lives. You know what she done? She knew that Pharaoh's daughter came down to the river to bathe at a certain time. And so she made this little ark. And she put Moses in that ark and put it right there where Pharaoh's daughter would come to bathe. And when she had the lid of that ark opened up, Moses began to cry. Why? It touched her heart. You know why? Because she was a woman. It touched her heart, and she took that baby as her own, and Moses was raised in Pharaoh's courts. But there's one difference, and the hand of God had to have been in it, because Moses' sister, I think her name was Miriam. I may be right. I hope I'm right on that. Miriam, okay. But she asked Pharaoh, or Pharaoh's daughter, because, Moses was still a baby that was nursing. Said, do you want me to find someone to take care of Moses in the nursing? Yes. Guess what she does? She goes and gets Moses' mama. And during that time that she had, even though that Moses was brought up in Pharaoh's courts, guess who was teaching her child? Moses' mama. Now, was she teaching him right? Yes, I believe so, because when it came time and he became a man, he refused to be called the daughter of Pharaoh. He had been taught well. Teaching today takes faith. But you know what? I think probably some of the greatest teaching that mamas do is not with words, but with actions. Let me give you an illustration of that. Never overlook what a mama is being able to teach. I read this, and you've probably heard this before, but they were a number of women together, a mama and, I don't know, probably a teenage daughter, and the mama was getting ready to cook a pot roast for dinner. And her daughter recognized that she cut both ends of that pot roast off before she put it in the oven. And she said, Mama, why? Why would you cut off the ends of that pot roast before she put it in the oven? She said, well, I don't know. I said, you'd have to ask your grandma on that. Picked it up from her. So the teenage girl, you know what she done? She got on the phone. Grandma, Mama said to ask you why that you cut off both ends of a pot roast before you cook it. And she said, hon, I really don't know that. But you would have to ask your great-grandma. Now, great-grandma was in a rest home. But whenever that the daughter pursued the deal and asked the great-grandma, because the mama didn't know why, they just did it. The grandma didn't know, they just did it. So she asked the great-grandma, Great-grandma, why do you cut off both ends of the roast, pot roast, before you cook it? Here's what the great-grandma said. Why, hon, she said, when I first got married, we had a small oven at our house, and I had to cut off both ends of the pot roast so we could cook it in that small oven. Do you see how easily, people, that what you do is transferred to your children? All the power that mamas have, they don't even realize sometimes that they're being watched by their children. Did you know, I think kindness can be picked up by a child because of kindness was shown to them, Diane, by their mom. Oh, there's so many things like that. Mamas have an influence. Today's society thinks if a woman does not get into the main flow of business and all those things, she's a nothing. I disagree with that totally. I think the original thing where God said that she would give childbirth and bring up children, I think that's still the major work, even though the world says it's not. Mamas, you deserve to be honored as mamas, even though you're probably imperfect. But here's the key thing, and here's the way I want to end this today. I wonder how much time Moses' mama prayed for Moses as she got ready to take that ark and put out there, where that she was stepping out by faith, what she done. Where the baby would be looked at, and when it cried, touched Pharaoh's daughter's heart, and she took it in. You know, there's a difference between men and women. Let's take a church setting just like this right here. I've seen it before. And you let a little baby begin to cry. You know who turns around to see why that baby's crying? It's not the daddies. They just keep looking forward. Almost every mama will turn around and look to see, why is that baby crying? That's because God put that instinct within them. You've got an instinct. You may be imperfect, but we serve a God that is able to do anything. I believe this nation will either stand or fall to a large extent because of the younger years that mamas and what they're teaching their children. I believe that. What I want to say is this: the power that a mother has is beyond recognition of just how great it is. But I'm going to say this. Roy, Larry, Connie, as we get ready for a verse of invitation, I believe the hand of God is needed in the process of you raising children. You may say, well, my children's grown, so I don't apply to me. Oh, yes, it does. Let me tell you something. See how many of you would agree with this? You worry more about your children after they're grown than you did when they were 6 and 8 years old. Anybody want to hold up a hand on that? I will. You never quit worrying about them. Why is that? Because you're a mama or a daddy. And oh, today, how we need God-led mamas and daddies to be raising our children in this day and time we live in. All the things they got to face, oh, how they need the support of a loving, virtuous woman, mama. Even though they're imperfect in flesh, they're not imperfect in love for their children. As we get ready for verse of invitation, let me ask a question. How much do you depend upon God to help you raise your children? Even if they're grown, how much do you still depend on what you say to them? Because they're listening. Probably listening better now than they did when they was teenagers. How important that mamas and daddies, I'll put daddies in on this too, are open and humble before God, where God can help you raise these precious children of everything that we do in this life. And some people have done some great things. There is nothing that you will do greater in this life than raise your children for the Lord. Greatest thing you can do, because eternity depends upon that. As we stand this morning, have a verse of invitation. God's touching your heart this morning. Your children probably watching you. I don't know, maybe it's a pot roast that's been cut off on both ends before they put it in the oven. But I'll guarantee you they're picking up on what you're doing. If your heart is not right with God, it needs to be able to raise your children rightly. As we have a verse of invitation, is there a need this morning? Would you come?